So one stereotype that you guys have given me already that you don't know of is that immigrants are people who take less socioeconomic status jobs. Go to the next slide. So before I get into that, this is the definition from the State Department's website. A refugee is forced from their home and have crossed into an international border because they're basically afraid of these persecutions based on any of these ideas. An immigrant could be the exact same scenario, but there's no physical force from a government or a threat, really. Or, you know, you can be an immigrant and just want to move to another country. That's what an immigrant is as well. Immigrant is very wide as a term, whereas refugee is very specific. And I have a table that shows how many people are actually immigrants, how many are refugees. An internally displaced person is someone who is like a refugee, but he or she cannot leave. So this happens a lot in parts of Asia and Africa specifically, and also in Latin America due to corrupt governments. You know, they can't physically leave their country, but they are still afraid, so they're hiding out in camps or, you know, just staying low as possible. Next. Alright, so this is it. I can't see the actual numbers here, but out of all the people that are moving around the world, the majority are immigrants. The internally displaced peoples are next, and refugees are only a small percentage. It's 1% of all mobile people, so it's really not many. Next. For Richmond, we have one major refugee resettlement and immigrant service type organization, and it's that very name, Refugee Resettlement and Immigrant Services. It is now under the CCC, which is the Catholic Charities, which the State Department works with directly to handle all types of these services so that the government doesn't have to directly subsidize it. They offer, this is all as soon as they get there. So as soon as refugees, not immigrants per se, but more refugees, when they come, they get immediate food, clothing, and housing. Housing is tricky because it's different for each city, and it's different, you know, year to year. Near the university where we serve, where we actually teach English, there is a housing community that works directly with RRIS to subsidize some of the housing. However, it changes if someone gets into trouble or if there's gang-related activity, they're forced to move. They were living on the south side of Richmond in this one location, but there was a lot of violence, so they moved them. So these people are often moved and never really know where they're going, and it's very hard to assimilate into the culture and really feel part of it. Also, an orientation to the laws and customs of the U.S., although it's almost like Bonner orientation to where you get all this information thrown at you. You don't really understand, but you hope that in the next 4 years you'll get most of it right. That's kind of how this is. They also are assigned a caseworker that, you know, helps with these things, and then they go to ESL classes. Refugees are mandated ESL classes. However, I can tell you as a worker there, the focus of RRIS is to get a job. With the economy right now, they're not worried about English necessarily. They're worried about getting them into the workforce because, you see, this is how much they make as a refugee, because the U.S. has nothing to gain from the refugee economically in its mind. So the UN tells them how many they have to take, and this is how much that they give them, and no more. And this just changed to this amount. It was lower. So for 8 months, you get $305 per person. And then if you're in the same family, $80 extra. But this lasts for 8 months. Also, the flight over, they pay for it, but you have to pay it back eventually. So it's really tough to be a refugee. You know, after a certain amount of time, we're constantly getting more people kind of forget about you, and you're still expected to make payments, and you're expected to have a job and speak English and, you know, be fully part of the society, but obviously that's pretty difficult. Thankfully for the children, they get a little more aid, and they're introduced into the school setting, and ESL at schools usually work pretty well, where they have a liaison that comes to the home and will help, which is great.
My parents basically just put me in the education system in America, and I did not know a word of English, so it took me about 2.5 years to, fully become, I guess, proficient in English. So, and even now, my parents don't speak English like I do, so, and I also like the Hispanic Liaison Office. One of the main things that we try to address is the language barrier. So, I know, speaking from my personal experience and also seeing in the, more specifically the South Side community in Richmond, the language barrier and, the government, although, the Latino population is one of the, is the biggest minority group, and they do have, some applications in Spanish and English, but that language barrier, I guess, is the biggest one that I've seen from them.
I would think language causes all the problems that immigrants have, because in order to find a job, you have to speak the language. In order to go to school, you have to speak the language. In order to communicate with others, you have to speak the language. So I would think, because we're teaching ESL and RS, and it's one of the most important things that people face while adopting a new place here in America. And they're very excited to learn a new language when they come, but after a while they get exhausted because it's so hard. They have time pressure, they have everything else that is going on to learn a new language. And they kind of push themselves to learn it just to find a job for adults, basically. So I would think the language is the most important barrier that they face.
I agree with them. My mom and I moved to US 6 years ago. I took English when I was little, but my mom didn't speak a word of English. And she went to take ESL classes at a community college. And it was really hard for her to balance out work and ESL lesson. But it worth it. After 5 years, she started to take classes at a regular community college courses, and now she's taking a nursing degree.
I would say the biggest barrier for people I've known recently coming to the U.S. would be job access, mainly because they have this idea that if they come to the U.S., then a lot of the opportunity is here, right? The land of opportunity. They think if they come here, they can automatically get a job, but they don't realize that once they get here, the application process is going to be more difficult than it seems. So that I know a lot of people recently that have been here literally 3 years. They've immigrated here, but they're sitting at home and they told themselves they were going to get a job. They told themselves they would start a new life here, but it is yet to happen.
A lot of the immigrants who come from Latin America come from low education levels. So first of all, they don't know the Spanish language. They haven't mastered that. They don't have high educational attainment from their countries. So that they come into America, they're kind of forced into learning the English language to maneuver through the system. So now you have to first you have to learn your native tongue. How to speak. Well, they obviously speak it, but how to read it and write it. If they don't know Spanish, now they have to, on top of learning to speak write and read Spanish, they have to like learn English too. So it's really difficult because a lot of them don't have, such high education levels. So it's really difficult for them because they don't have those skills.
I think you faced the first stereotype when everyone was talking that immigrants and refugees get the like low socioeconomic jobs, and I feel like that's the main thing. It depends on the ethnicity of a refugee or an immigrant, because we all know that whites, blacks, Asians, they have their own stereotypes, and people judge them based on those stereotypes.
I would also have to add like the lack of political voice that you have, because as when you like the immigration process, it takes a long time, and for you like I'm a U.S. citizen now. Like I recently just became one, and it took years for that to happen. And for you to get political voice, you have to be a U.S. citizen. So you get your voice out there. I mean, there are like nonprofits and different organizations that you can voice your opinion to so they could go to the higher end people to get your voice out there. But it's really tough for people who back to the whole language barrier thing. Like if you don't know that you can voice your opinion to get your rights heard, then your political voice lacks.
But when I was resettled with a similar organization as RES, or Catholic Charities, it's called International Rescue Committee, which has different offices throughout the U.S., and they also work outside of the U.S. An international organization of migration is a very huge organization that helps refugees and immigrants to resettle in different countries. Basically, IOM decides where people have to go. They have their numbers. For example, the U.S. gives it this organization number. We can accept these many immigrants and refugees, and then they decide who can come here and who cannot. A lot of charities, either religious-based or faith-based or other kind of charities, also help to transition to a new life. And also the education system, especially for children, is a huge part in order to adapt to a new culture, a new language. And it's just basic. It depends on what kind of education you have in public schools and private schools to decide whether you're going to be successful and independent throughout your life.
I feel like the religion group is really helpful in the transition, especially with my mom's Catholic, and when she would go to church, like she made acquaintances, and they would invite her over. They would help her with just simple things, where to find this or where to go to have your health checked, or simple things like that.
I would say assimilation can be a good thing as long as you keep your own culture.
So it's good to assimilate, but at the same time, it's like you can't forget like your own culture, because that's what makes you unique. So for me, I found like it's important, just like she said, it's important to for you to assimilate, I guess, to a culture, a different one. So that would make you even more valuable, because now you have two different cultures that you can identify with.